Hello, everybody, and welcome to a video where I'm going to be talking about one of the topics that I think is most important for Magic going forward, one of its greatest strengths that I feel is not currently being utilized to the max and is maybe even being chipped away at slowly but surely, and that is the issue of the history of the game and how the older cards find a place to be played with in Magic the Gathering, specifically in Eternal formats like Modern, Legacy, and at this point, Commander is a big place where I see this kind of erosion happening. The reason that I thought of this topic is because I was watching a video where the maker of the video touched on World of Warcraft and how one of the reasons it's so successful compared to other MMORPGs is the fact that it has such a large history behind it, that there's just such a depth of world and places you can go and things you can do in the game. And immediately my mind drew the parallel to Magic the Gathering, where compared to up-and-coming TCGs like maybe Flesh and Blood, or even something like, if you're thinking of a digital experience like Legends of Runeterra or things like that, Magic the Gathering has over 20 years worth of cards to draw upon to facilitate into formats and things of that nature. And I feel like recently the strategy has been to move away from that history and focus on newer things and brighter things and shinier things and kind of lose some of that like magic feeling from being able to play with certain old cards. Now, before I go deeper into this video, I do want to say that I don't want the comment section to be super negative and super critical of all the recent decisions, because the people that are making the new cards are doing a great job making a fun gameplay experience. It's just a very different gameplay experience, at least from my perspective. And I think that it's worth mentioning that there are two sides to every coin. Every decision has some pros and some cons, except for, most decisions have some pros and some cons if they are a fairly complex one. And I don't want the comment section to just degenerate into people complaining about the state of modern Magic. With that being said, with that little spiel out of the way, I would like to say that first things first, I would like to talk about the addition of Modern Horizons and Modern Horizons 2 to the Modern format. I feel like I used to play a good amount of Modern, and when Modern Horizons came out, it felt like Modern was no longer a format that was it was just completely different in the span of one set. And there have been massive meta shifts caused by one set. For example, when Oath of the Gatewatch came out, along with all of those Eldrazi, it led to a massive shift in Modern that ended up resulting in some bans. But Modern Horizons felt like almost a targeted strike, where they were going to juice up the format, change what was good, and even add new decks to the format. And what ended up happening was they did that a little bit too successfully, and a lot of the older decks just couldn't compete with the new cards on the block. Modern Horizons 2 came out, and a similar thing happened, and what we're left with is a situation where, when I was scrolling through the Modern deck lists, about 10 to 15 cards in a lot of the top decks, most of the top decks I would say, come from Modern Horizons or Modern Horizons 2. And when you think of the fact that 25 cards in a deck are lands, or 24 or something like that, that leaves me like 10 to 15 cards out of the remaining 35 is just a massive chunk of cards, and it just drastically changes the way the format plays. And it feels less like a Modern format and more of a which deck can you build that uses the most Modern Horizons cards, because those cards are clearly pushed and the best thing to be doing in the format. Now, it's also easy to say just play what you want, but in many cases, if you're playing with other people in this ecosystem and they're playing these new cards, if you don't play with the new cards, you're just going to get destroyed every time, and you just eventually don't want to play the format anymore. It is not an easy problem to solve, but I feel like the Modern Horizons sets in general, despite the fact that they've been very fun to draft and very successful in terms of selling product, have fundamentally changed the format, and they have made it not feel like Modern anymore, at least for the people who played Modern before the sets came out. It just doesn't, it's almost unrecognizable in many ways from the old Modern format. And it kind of emphasizes the fact that they don't really care about the ability to play with these older cards as much. They see a way to sell extra products by juicing up the format, and it looks like this kind of power creep solution almost, where recently we've seen so many more powerful cards printed, and I don't necessarily think that that is going to lead to the best gameplay experience overall in the long run. Because if you keep printing Modern Horizons sets, you just slowly constrict the number of cards you can play until it's just these Modern Horizons sets, and then it's not even Modern, it's just Modern Horizons the format. It's almost as if you were to buy a board game And then over time, new expansions come out until you get to the point where the board game is almost unrecognizable. And that's kind of a cool ecosystem, a cool part of Magic the Gathering's history, where the original alpha set came out, and then over time they kept adding expansions, and the range of possibilities of what you could do grew and grew and grew and grew until you get to a point where it feels like the possibilities are endless. I remember when I first started playing, I was just playing against these decks that I had never even heard of. They weren't like tiered decks. I was playing with cards that I had like drafted or something like that. And I played against like a Minotaur tribal deck, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. I played it against the deck that was built around flipping coins. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And obviously those aren't like competitively viable decks. So you could make an argument that kitchen table Magic is going to be the same as it has always been, and maybe they don't care about the Modern Horizons products. But I think it's really cool that if you looked at like a Pro Tour like stream or something, and you were a casual player and you see these cards, like, wow, this card's from like 20 years ago, and it's seeing play, and these old synergies are like, oh man, this is like Mirrodin block, Arcbound Ravager's doing some stuff, you've got all these crazy artifact synergies, or just kind of just general synergies like that. And now it's more like, oh, they played this card from Modern Horizons, and they comboed into a card from Modern Horizons, and they played this card that was from a set in the last 2 years that they clearly pushed to be playable in Modern. And it feels like I'm worried that going forward, it's just going to get more and more constricted like that, where it's almost, if you had that previous example where you have this ecosystem of a game and then expansions, all of a sudden you just dropped one massive expansion right in the middle that just sucked all of the life out of the surrounding ecosystem and just put it into one spot. And that's kind of where I feel like that is. Another format that I don't want to just talk about Modern is another format is Commander, where Commander, as they continue to release a bevy of Commander product options, they slowly erode at the kind of history of the format where it used to be, okay, this is my Commander, and these are cards that I can put in my Commander deck, and maybe these are like kind of some cool old cards that kind of fit with the synergies. And a lot of these new cards that they make for Commander, they're usually like one or two a set maybe, that's just so much more powerful than the other options that if you end up playing against other people, even if you don't like to use the cards yourself, you play against a lot of people who do like to use the cards because they just like to play somewhat optimal decks. Even if it's not like a competitive EDH deck, they just want to play like the optimal cards. So you just play against the same cards very frequently, where it used to be that you could go like you could play against multiple different opponents and very rarely see like the same cards in common. But now it feels like you're playing games and you just see the same few spells depending on what color they're going to be. And it just makes it, at least for me, a less fun experience, a less diverse experience, and it feels like kind of a hit. And I do love the Commander Precon decks. I think they're a great addition, but it feels like they like to just juice something in there that then becomes a format staple and everyone has to pick up. And it doesn't necessarily really align with embracing the history of the game. And the final thing I want to talk about in this video with regards to history of the game is Magic Arena. And Magic Arena kind of threw a wrench in things because I think it was more successful than they thought it was going to be initially when it came out. And it kind of warped the way that they approach things with regards to their strategy for years after Arena became a big hit. And one thing that I think Arena has the potential to do that they don't seem to be prioritizing as much as I think they should is getting old sets onto Arena. Because I imagine in my mind, my great mind, that designing sets and playtesting sets is one of the hardest parts of the manufacturing of the game. At least for me, that feels like it would be one of the hardest parts. And you have this backlog of sets that you have already designed that are no longer playable in the vast majority of cases, that if you put them into Arena, this new audience of people that have never experienced these sets before will play them. And you already have this backlog of design. It feels like just almost to me like a no-brainer in many ways to start just adding these older sets because it just makes everybody happy. I don't really see the audience that gets less happy when they add a set. And I feel like it would be viable commercially. Now, recently, when they've been releasing old sets, they've been putting in extra effort to remaster the sets, to make them better than what they were before. But I don't even think that that is necessary, because one of the things that's really cool about going back in time is you can see how Magic has evolved. And once again, this goes to the history aspect. You're like, wow, this is... Whenever I play a flashback draft on Magic the Gathering online, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a really cool feeling because I'm playing a set that was designed in 2004. They could totally do this on Magic Arena. The software can accommodate all sorts of cards. We've seen in random events and stuff that they have had Black Lotus on the site and things like that. And going back in time, just maybe release a normal set, release a flashback set, release a normal set, release a flashback set. And just going back in time like that feels like a good use of resources because you don't have to spend time on the design aspect. You just have to spend time on the programming aspect. And sure, programming is difficult, and sure, the client has a lot of problems on the programming front. Not really the topic of this video, but it feels like it just ticks all the boxes, because if you are a constructed player and there's a format on Arena where you can play with the formats that are older as they go back, that introduces a natural feeling rotation, unlike Alchemy, which I think to many players, again, feels very forced and inorganic compared to the way Magic has historically been. But if you're just going back and adding one of these older sets, it's going to shift the format naturally without having to design cards specifically for Arena, which I do think is kind of interesting and kind of cool that they have decided to go in that direction. And I think it's a very interesting design space to see what you can do with those sorts of things. But I think it's just a very natural feeling for Magic players as a whole if they're just adding sets one at a time. And also players that play limited, like myself, enjoy drafting old sets, especially if you're a newer player. At least in my mind, it was always very satisfying when I got some friends together and we got enough packs to draft one of the older sets, or a chaos draft where there's cards from older sets. It feels very cool to be experiencing a piece of Magic's history that you weren't around for, and to kind of see it for the first time. And since a lot of Magic Arena players haven't been around necessarily that long, adding an old set is like adding a brand new set for them. It's like, okay, all the limited players for that set would get super excited. All the constructed players, I feel like, would be like, okay, now that this new set's going to come out, we're going to be able to expand our deck. And I feel like there'd be some brewing in advance even, where they're like, okay, Battle of Zendikar's coming back. What are we going to do with getting an ally for Zendikar? That sort of thing. Just a very cool vibe. I feel like that is being underutilized, partially because I feel like they don't necessarily value the power, in the cool things you can do with having all of these old cards in one place. Because Magic the Gathering, if it came out today, would be a completely different product. It would be a completely different game if you only took the cards from the last 5 years. If it was a newborn game, you don't even know if it would be successful in today's world, where there's so many competitive things on people's minds, and there's different outlets for gaming and things like that. But I feel like if you go back in time and you can kind of show off, this is how the game has evolved over time. It's been here for over 20 years, going on 30 here, and these are all the cool things you can do. I think that'd be a really great thing. It just is so, there's so much depth in the game. There's so many cards in the game, and it feels like a lot of the time they're just skating on the surface these days, and they don't just want to go back and either support the older cards or things like that. And I think that there is a good incentive to do that, and I think it would work out for them. So yeah, those are my thoughts. It's just a topic that's been on my mind, and I just kind of almost stream of thought. I did do some organization, obviously, of these, but this is just kind of what I think on the topic, and I would love to hear what you think as well in the comments down below. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.